Echo's Bones by Samuel Beckett. The dead die hard. They are trespassers on the beyond. They must take the place as they find it, the shafts and the manholes back into the muck, till such time as the lord of the manor incurs, through his long acquiescence, a duty of care in respect of them. Then they are free among the dead, by all means. Then their troubles are over, their natural troubles. But the debt of nature, that scandalous post-obit on one's own estate, can no more be discharged by the mere fact of kicking the bucket than descent can be made into the same stream twice. This is a true saying. At least, it can be truly said of Belekwa, who now found himself up and about in the dust of the world, back at his old games in the dim spot, on so many different occasions that he sometimes wondered if his lifeless condition were not all a dream, and if on the whole he had not been a great deal deader before than after his formal departure, so to speak, from among the quick. No one was more willing than himself to admit that his definite individual existence had in some curious way been an injustice, and that this tedious process of extinction, its protracted faults of old error, was the atonement imposed on every upstart into animal spirits, each in the order of time. But this did not make things any more pleasant or easy to bear. It occurred to him one day, as he sat bent double on a fence, like a casse poitrine in delicious reverie, and puffed away at his Romeo and Juliet, that perhaps, if he had been cremated rather than inhumed directly, he would have been less liable to revisit the vomit. But happily for all of us, this thought was too egregious to detain him long. He tried all he knew without shifting his position, however, to conceive of his exuviae as preserved in an urn or other receptacle in some kind person's sanctum, or as drifting about like a cloud of randy pollen. But somehow he could not quite bring it off. This simple little flight. Was it possible that his imagination had perished in the torture chamber, that non-smoking compartment? That would indeed be something to be going on with. That would be what a maddened prizeman, his eyes out on stalks like a sentinel crab's with zeal and excitement, would call a step in the right direction. To state it then fairly fully once and for all, Belekwa is a human, dead and buried, restored to the jungle, yes, really, restored to the jungle, completely exhausted, conscious of his shortcomings, sitting on this fence day in, day out, having this palpitation, picking his nose between cigars, suffering greatly from exposure. This he and the position from which he ventures, to which he is even liable to return after the fiasco, in which he is installed for each dose of expiation of great strength, from which he is caught up each time a trifle better, drier, less of a natural snob. These predicates do not cover him. No number of them could. If as dense tissue of corporal herediments, he was predicateless, how much more so then a spook? But cover they do the mean, the least presentable aspect of his cruel reversion. 3 scenes from which the first, the central, and the last we make bold to solicit as likely material for this fag piece, this little triptych. To begin then at the beginning, he felt himself nodding in the grey shoals of angels, his co-departed, that thronged the womb tomb. Distinctly he felt himself lapsing from a beatitude of sloth that was infinitely smoother than oil, and softer than pumpkins. He found himself fighting in vain against the hideous torpor and the grit and glare of his lids on the eyeball so long lapped in gloom. And the next thing was, he was horsed, as it were, for major discipline on the fence, as seen above, the bells pealing in all the steeples, his pockets crammed with cigars. He took the band off one of these, lit it, looked into his heart, and exclaimed, "My soul begins to be idly goaded and racked. All the old pains and aches of me soul junk return." Hardly had this thought burst from his brain as a phosphate from the kidneys when a woman shot out of the hedge and stood before him, serene yet not relaxedly gay. There she stood, frankly alluring him to come and doubt not, stretching forth to hug him her holy hands, pollutant with a million good examples. There was nothing at all of the grave widow or anile virgin about her, nothing in the least barren in her appearance. She would be, if she were not already, the fruitful mother of children of joys. "They call me Zaborovna," she simpered. "I don't hear what you say," said Belekwa. "Speak up, will you?" Now, it must be clearly understood that there were no stews where Belekwa came from. No stews and no demand for stews, but here, in the dust, with night getting ready to fall, it was quite a different matter. Belekwa felt he had been dead a long time, 40 days at least. "You are Belekwa," she said, "whom we took for dead? Or I'm a Dutchman." "I am," said Belekwa, "restored for a time by lousy fate to the nuts and balls and sparrows of the low stature of animation. But who is we, and who are you?" "I told you," she said. "Zabarovna, at your service. And we, why, little we's just an impersonal usage, the Tuscan reflexive, without more." "The mood," said Belekwa, "forgive the term, of self-abuse, as the English passive of masochism." "How long do you expect to be with us?" said Zabarovna. "As long as I live," said Belekwa. "On and off, I have the feeling." "You mean with intermissions?" she said. "Do you know," said Belekwa, "I like the way you speak very much." "The way I speak?" she said. "I find your voice," he said, "something more than a roaring meg against melancholy. I find it a covered wagon to me that I am weary on the way. I do, indeed." "So musical," she said. "I would never have thought it." It was high time for a pause to ensue, and a long one did. The lady advanced a pace towards the fence. Clearly she was sparring for an opening. Belekwa pulled furiously at the immense cigar. A bird, its beak set in the heaven, flew by. "Too late," he exclaimed at last in piercing tones. "Too late." "What is too late?" said Zabarovna. "This encounter," said Belekwa. "Can't you see my life is over?" "Oh," she said, in a voice something between a caress and a dig in the ribs. "I wouldn't go so far as to say that." In the echo of the above pause, she seized her opportunity, transferred her slyly grave deportment to the knees and thighs of the revenant, which parts of him trembled in the chill of the hour. A colony of rooks made their evening flight and darkened the sky. Yes, actually darkened the sky. Belekwa polished off his cigar, pressed it out fiercely against the rail, elevated his mind to God, crossed himself 1,000 times. "Forgive me," he said. I'm as bad as Dr. Rita Veaton. I can see your shaggy red brows distinctly. I can't recall your name for the moment. Zabarovna, she said. Yours to command. Miss Zabarovna Privet. Put your arm about her, won't you? Bellecois, whom nothing could teach not to spit and dig for clotted mucus in the presence of ladies, shanghaied now a snot on his cuff, and brought his eyes that were so sore with one thing and another, whinging, and the light, that quick change artist, close up to those sparklers of the first water, on which he seemed to discern a number of babies of the privet, who after a short and gallant struggle was constrained to look away, so searing, so red-hot, and parallel were the prongs of his gaze. Away she looked to the cool, not to say bitter, east, and observed her shadow, like an old man's desire, prone and monstrous on the grass, but not a sign of her pickups, out of whose lap she sprang at once, and stood on the ground well to one side, thinking that perhaps she had been seeing single, and looked again. But her impression was confirmed by the absence of any shadow but the fences and her own, projected in tattered umber, far across the waste. The sun was there all right, belting away in the west behind, ignoring him completely. This body that did not intercept the light, this packet of entrails that had shed the ashen spancels, she looked it up and down. He had produced a razor from some abyssal pocket and was lovingly whittling a live match. This, when pointed according to his god, he used to pierce a deep meatus in a fresh cigar, visit his teeth all round top and bottom, light the cigar. Then he made to throw it away, but recovered himself in time and stuck it like a golf tee in the stuff of his pullover. Tears rushed down the cheeks of Zabarovna as she hurled herself into the arms of her prey. No easy matter. Wipe them, said Bellecois. He was most ardent and sad all of a sudden, a guilty-red twinkle in his eye. How long then was this strangery of decency going to go on? The privet was present, panting away to no apparent avail, wilful waste like the beatific paps of a nun of Minsk. While as for himself, cold as January at the best of times, he was no more capable now, when any moment might be the last of the current lot, ring him back to the gloom, where stews and therefore privets had no sense of rising to such a buxom occasion than Alfieri or Jean-Jacques of dancing a minuet. Yet he was sorely tempted to try. That was the pitch of it. Dry those handsome eyes, he said, as distinctly as the cigar would allow. Don't drown the babies. I see they're for a corpse in torment. He withdrew the cigar, put his features into a sudden spin of anguish, righted them no less abruptly, replaced the cigar. That was the kind of thing he meant. That was the torment coming to the surface to breathe. Now she knew. Soothed by this kind closeness, she said, "It is not so much you as your shadow. What has befallen it?" Now, the fact of the matter is that a personal shadow is like happiness, possession of being well deceived, hypnosis, apprehensible only as a lack. A stranger's shadow, the shadows of natural things, of trees, wings, ocean clouds, and the rest. One goes honing after these, and indeed it is hard to imagine how one could ever manage without them. But one's own, except in the case of a very nervous subject, Richard III, is as unobtrusive as the motion of the earth. To adopt the system of Galileo, that dials it. Bellecois looked wildly about him. "God, I don't know at all," he exclaimed. "I thought I had it." Zabarovna delivered herself now, and not a moment too soon, of the butterfly doctrine noted above. It was true, she said, of more things than heart's ease a woman's term, and shadow. It was only a chance, she said, that she had seen hers at all. She would pay more attention to it in the future. She looked to make sure it was still there. You may be right, said Bellecois. I don't say you're not. I'm a marked man, whatever way you look at it. There's more in it than that, thought Zabarovna. But hist! Every evening during the season, she said, Saturdays excepted, I lend myself to sublime delinquencies in the old town where I lodge, and lodge in some splendor, believe me. Happily tonight I am not booked. The sun set, the rooks flew home. Why did Bellecois always seem to be abroad at this hour of lowest vitality, surely? Portions of a poem by Oulad came into his mind. They received short shrift. No crows where I come from, he said. God be praised. Ah, said Zabarovna. Then there is a God after all? Presumably, said Bellecois. I know no more than I did. He seemed to have recovered from his sense of bereavement. Nevertheless, she was right. There was more in it, as the sequel may show. Then he thought. I should be happy to put you up, said Zabarovna. A long, black, cylindrical Galloway cow, in her heyday a kind and quick feeder, now obviously seriously ill with rinderpest, red water, and contagious abortion, staggered out of the ground fog, collapsed, and slipped calf. It was all over in a flash. Happy to put you up, said Zabarovna. When you say, put me up, said Bellecois, what do you mean exactly? Not having properly sized up her man, she kept the wrong things back. You are far too hospitable, said Bellecois. I couldn't dream of it. The cow, greatly eased, on her back, her forelegs inditing the firmament, was in the article of death. Bellecois knew what that was. And you don't utter all your mind, he said, unless I am greatly mistaken. Well then, she said, fried garlic and Cuban rum. What do you say to that? Human rum, exclaimed Bellecois. Cuban, she said, a guinea a bottle. Something simply had to happen. The ground fog lifted. The sky was mare-stale and shed a vivid light, ghastly in the puddles that pitted the land, but beautiful also, like the complexion in Addison's disease. A child, radiant in scarlet diaper and pale blue pilch, skipped down off the road and began to sail a boat. Though you hedge, said Bellecois, Miss Privet, yet do you win, and my shame be my glory. That's a sensible cadaver, said Zabarovna. She began to back away most gracefully. Let the deadbeats get on, said Bellecois. I can't bear a crowd. The faithful, seated with demons, a dim rabble, cringing home after vespers, regrettably not Sicilian. In the van, an editor of a monthly masquerading as a quarterly, his bow hat cockaded fore and aft with a title page and a poem of pleasure, a tailor of John Jameson O'Lantern dancing before him. Next, a friend's wife, splendid specimen of exophthalmic goiter, storming along, her nipples up her nose. Next, a gypsy rondo, glabrous but fecund, by blow of a long line of aquas and illuminaciones. Next, Harry, leaning back, moving very stiff and open. Next, in a covered baby Austin, the Count of Parabimbi and his lady. Next, trained to a hair, a nest of rank outsiders, mending in perfect amity a hard place in Eliot, relaxing from time to quire their manifesto. Boycott Poulter's measure. Next, as usual, in the thick of the mischief, a caput of highly liberally educated ex-eunuchs, rotating slowly as they tottered forward, their worn buttocks gleaming through the slits in their robes. Next, Calic and Frika, stark, staring, naked, jotting notes for period dialogue with a cauter dipped in cocoa round the riddle of her navel. Mini ha ha, mini ha ha. Next, a honeymoon unicorn, browbeating his half-hunter. Next, a yogi milkman, singeing his beard with a standard candle, a contortionist leprechaun riding in his brain, abdominal. Next, the sisters, debauch and death, holding their noses. So they passed by and passed away, those mentioned one or two more. The second after the first, the third after the second, and so forth in order until the last, a fully grown androgyne of tempestuous loveliness. After the rest, and after the last, a spacious nothing. Bad, one by one, said Bellecois, very bad altogether. A frightful sound as of rent silk put the heart across him. There never was such a season for mandrakes, said Zabarovna. Alas, said Bellecois, Naini, the pranic pleb is far from being a mandrake. His leprechaun lets him out about this time every Sunday. They have no conduction. The dead cow would soon be a source of embarrassment. You remember the wonderful lines? A dog, a parrot, or an ape engrossed the fancies of the fair. Zabarovna let a ringing guffaw. Did you see the Parambimbi? She said. Where did she get her crucified smile, the little immaculate conception? Bellecois descended resolutely from the fence, took up a hole in his belt, plunged his hand into his pocket, and pulled out a patargas, the sweetest contingency by a long chalk, to come his way for many a day. Lit it, thought, now, if there should turn out to be a Voldigur in this assortment, and said, Whenever you are ready, miss. She tossed back the hissing vipers of her hair. Her entire body coquetted and writhed like a rope, foamed into a body akimbo that treed, cigar and all, her interlocutor. Poor fellow, there he was, petrified, back on the fence. And Zabarovna, 1 minute, the picture of exuberant countenance, the next, this gorgon. Truly, there is no accounting for some people. Women in particular seem most mutable, houses of infamous possibilities. So at least it seemed to Bellecois, not for the first time, numbed now on the fence. He himself varied by all means, but as something, some rhythmic principle whose seat he rather thought was in the pit of his stomach. An almanac of his inconstancies was not unthinkable, but these women, positively, it was scarcely an exaggeration to say that the 24 letters made no more and no more capricious variety of words in as many languages than they, their jigsaw souls foisted on them, that they might be damned, diversity of moods, exaggeration or not. That was how it struck Bellecois, more forcibly now, as he adhered firmly to the fence, and heard with great thankfulness the flows of shock crack in his heart box than perhaps ever before. A quantity of phrases presented themselves to Zabarovna, who thus to her annoyance found herself faced with the alternative of saying nothing or preferring one. The garlic won't be worth eating, she said, and at once repented her choice, as though she had had the least part in it, the pretty creature. So astute in some matters, so crass in others, so crass astute in as many again, intruding like a flea her loose familiarities into the most retired places. How can she ever expect, as she does, to excel? But now for it, and like a lamb he followed her steps, up hill and down dale, to her lodging, where having arrived in the core of the darkest hour, he at once devoured the garlic, tossed off the white rum, through them thus mingled after the manner of Ninus the Assyrian, higgly-piggly on the stones, mentioned that he was bemired with sins, naked of good deeds, and the meat of worms. Then to his astonishment was ravished, but ravished out of the horrid jaws agape for the love-feast, the wrinkled gums and the Hutchinson fangs which bit into nothing more fruity than what she afterwards described to a bosom pal as the dream of the shadow of the smoke of a rotten cigar. Just as the first sun opened a little eye in the heaven of Blue Monday and gave light to a cock, ravished, in the sense of reassumed, the first dose of resurgence, having acted into the lush plush of woo me to me.